KSI defeated Joe Fournier thanks to this, while likely incidental, still very illegal elbow. And in this video, we're gonna break down and talk about some fight science. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you about the underlying anatomy and medical side of the sports world. So if this kind of thing interests you, then please consider subscribing to help support the channel. This fight was a great opportunity to bring in an audience that otherwise might not see my videos. And let's start with just the anatomy here of the elbow from KSI. So yes, this was an illegal elbow. Whether or not it was incidental, it was illegal. You can't throw an elbow like this and win as a result of knocking somebody out with this elbow. But a couple of things to point out here as we go in. Number one, yes, it looks like the glove does maybe barely right down at the wrist catch a little bit of Fournier's face. You can see here how his eye is in kind of a nice still position, and then as we advance just a single frame, there is a little bit of ever so subtle movement. Now, the immediate frame right after that is the full force of KSI's elbow landing on Fournier's left side of his face in an area called the zygomatic process that we'll talk about later on. Now, the reason a shot like this is so significant and does so much damage is because it's truly the bone of the forearm hitting the bone of the skull. There's no muscle in this area around KSI's arm where he strikes and lands on Fournier's left side of the face. We call this back portion the lateral or dorsum of the elbow and forearm. And the muscles on this part of the forearm are going to be the extensors. It's the muscles that lift your wrist up and that straighten your fingers out. If you've ever had tennis elbow affects the tendons that we can see coming off right here off of this lateral epicondyle, which is a part of the humerus or the upper arm bone. Now, the real hard bump that you can feel on the back of your elbow, that's called the olecranon. The olecranon is actually part of the ulna. The ulna is one of the two bones in the forearm that are coming down here out to the wrist. So this really firm bump right here, where some of this blow is going to land, is actually part of the forearm rather than the bone of the humerus. But the key thing here is there's muscles on the top side of the forearm, there's muscles on the inside of the forearm, but along the back side of the forearm, if you push, you feel a bone. And that bone that you're pushing on and feeling is the ulna. And what you'll appreciate is that there's no real muscle covering that bone right there on the inner portion that's gonna land here on Fournier. So as this elbow comes through on KSI, there's no muscle cushioning the impact. There's nothing else there to absorb the energy. And so all of it is being delivered into Fournier's skull, resulting in this eventual knockout. If the elbow or forearm are rotated inward a little bit, just so that the muscles land, this is probably not gonna have the same effect and probably wouldn't have knocked him out because the muscles of KSI's forearm would have absorbed some of that impact and energy and not surmounted. Next, we'll dive into all these muscles and talk about them on our biodigital anatomy tool. Next, we'll dive into all these muscles on our anatomy tool and then also talk about the potential damage for Fournier on the receiving end of this blow. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. This video is sponsored by Mugsy. It's time to re-up that spring and summer wardrobe, and I want to recommend to you the maker of the most comfortable jeans for men on the planet, Mugsy. Oftentimes for men's fashion, we have to sacrifice comfort or style. There's typically no having both. But Mugsy changes that. With their proprietary stretch denim, they make jeans that look really fashionable, but feel as comfortable as if you're wearing sweatpants. They have 4 different styles to choose from, so there's a fit for every style and preference. They're not gonna be too baggy, but also not too tight. Mugsy also offers stretch chinos, joggers, shorts, tops, and everything in between for your wardrobe. Right now, I'm really excited about these Cool Max jeans that are a much more lightweight fabric, a lot more breathable denim to make you look sharp, but also be nice and comfortable during these warm spring and summer months. Their stretch material moves with you, not against you, to help support a fashionable but active lifestyle. Right now, if you head to Mugsy.com and use code Brian10, you're gonna get 10% off your purchase. Your clothes are shipped conveniently to your front door with free shipping, and they also offer free returns. So stop sacrificing comfort for fashion and check out Mugsy jeans today. Thank you again to Mugsy for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. Now, with our biodigital anatomy tool here, what I've highlighted are the different muscles of the forearm. So this is going to be the humerus, this is the upper arm bone, and then as we go down, we of course have the hand, and this is going to be that lateral or outer portion of the elbow. You can identify it based on where we see the thumb. So as we scroll up here and look more closely, all of these muscles coming off of that lateral epicondyle are going to be those extensor muscles. As we rotate around to the inside of the elbow, now we have on the inside of the elbow all the wrist flexor muscles. Those are the muscles that pick the wrist up and grip and squeeze the fingers. All of them have these muscles and tendons that originate at just one spot, but then extend down to these really long tendons that ultimately go out to the fingers. If we zoom around to the backside here, what you'll catch is number one, We'll hide a couple of these muscles just so you can see it a little bit better. But there we see that ulna. So this is the ulna, highlighted in yellow. This bump right here, that's that olecranon process we were talking about, that really hard protrusion that you can feel in the back of your elbow. But then there's this ridge that goes down the backside of the forearm where there's no muscles covering it, all the way down through here. And this is going to be right at that region where KSI's elbow lands. Again, because there's no surrounding muscles, it's positioned just right. All of that load is going to be transmitted from the hard surface of the bone into the hard surface of Fournier's skull. So now let's go back to the other side of this with Fournier's skull and the potential trauma that you can sustain based on this load. What you have to understand is where the impact is striking on the face. Now there's a little bit of hit that comes into the nose of Fournier, but most of it is striking right on this bump on the left side of his face. Now you can push this on yourself. You can feel this hard protrusion, and what you're feeling there is the lower portion of your orbital socket. Your orbit is the eye, and the orbital socket is all the bones that make up that surrounding bony structure that our eyeball sits inside. So as this elbow comes through, our bodies are designed pretty smart, right? If we don't have this hard protrusion all the way around our eye, that elbow comes in and it squashes directly on the eyeball, which of course could blind somebody. But we're designed and we evolved in a really smart way to where we have this bony prominence that sticks out in front of the eyeball to absorb these loads and protect the eye. So here as KSI's forearm comes in, it's going to strike right at that bony prominence just below Fournier's eye. Now, number one, we have to worry about potential facial fractures here, which we'll review in our anatomy. But number two, of course, the amount of abrupt rotation that we see in Fournier's head is going to ultimately lead to him getting knocked out. Oftentimes with a concussion, we'll see this really quick, abrupt just rotation of the head. And you can see as KSI's elbow comes in, as we just advance a couple of frames, Fournier's head goes from being perfectly still, the brain is nice and in a good state of equilibrium with inside the skull, to then all of a sudden within a matter of a few frames, this violent rotation that sends all this force not only through his brain, but also through the brain stem. That combination of rotational forces that get transmitted into the brain, along with how the brain is going to suddenly sort of spin inside the skull and rock against the inside of the skull because of how it's supported by this spinal fluid, is ultimately what leads to that disruption of the signaling, the neurons within the brain, and subsequently that knockout and loss of consciousness. With our anatomy model here, let's finish up by looking at those different bones of the skull. So looking at the left side here, this first bone highlighted, that's going to be the maxilla, that's our upper jaw. The next bone over to the side, that's the zygomatic process. And so that bump you're feeling lower beneath your eye is going to be that confluence of the zygomatic bone along with the maxilla. Of course, the top is going to be the frontal bone. We have the mandible, which is the lower portion of the jaw. The sphenoid bone sits deeper inside and forms that lateral portion of the orbital socket, and then we have the temporal bone, which sits beneath the ear. Now, if I hide the eye, we can get a better look at that whole orbital socket. The orbital socket, again, is all these different bones that come together to form that area where the eye is going to sit and be protected. Whenever we hear about an orbital fracture, it's a fracture of one of these bones making up that socket of the orbit. And so in this case, with a blow like Fournier received, we could potentially be looking at a fracture to that orbital floor because of where the impact came in, potentially either the zygomatic bone or maybe this maxilla bone. But hopefully this gives you a good sense of just that underlying anatomy and what we have to worry about with a shot like this. So that's it for the video, everybody. I hope these are educational. I hope they're not too simplified and don't get repetitive. But again, it's nice to bring in a different audience whenever we have a sport event like this and just take a look at something that happened, teach you a little bit of anatomy along the way while we're looking at some highlights. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.